Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I think a lot of you guys know how much I like throwing glide baits and big swim baits. I am a nut when it comes to custom made swim baits and glide baits. It's just one of those things I feel like they're works of art, and therefore, when I see one I like, I gotta have it. So I've been throwing them now for probably 5 years, like really trying to get into it. And I want to give you a little story about one thing that I learned early on that makes a big difference with respect to glide baits, but I apply this now to a lot of different baits, crank baits, even jerk baits, top waters. It's something that I think you guys might want to pay attention to and might want to try because it's going to improve your fishing performance just like it has for me. All right, so here's the background story. I would say probably, this is probably 5 years ago, three to 5 years ago. I was out throwing a glide bait with a friend of mine, and I was on the water and we were having a lot of success. We were having a lot of fish that were following the bait back to the boat, but I was having a really hard time getting those fish to commit to the bait. And it wasn't because, they weren't interested in the bait. It was because I could not see the fish following the bait until they got close to the boat. Meaning, basically, I was pulling my bait out of the water and then I would recognize that the fish were there. And the issue was I could not determine where my bait was in the water. Meaning, I would make a cast, I could kind of tell where my bait was at, but because I couldn't see my bait, I didn't know where to be looking to tell if there was a fish that was following my bait. And what I quickly recognized after that, as I started doing more research as to how to become a better glide bait fisherman, was that there was a common trend that I was starting to see a lot of the top swim bait fishermen do to their baits that was out of the norm. And that single little thing was a huge help to them because it allows them to identify where their bait is in the water. And therefore, they can easily determine whether or not there's a shadow or a fish following that bait. Because if you don't know where your bait is, you're going to have a really hard time determining whether or not there's a fish behind it. And that's a simple thing that they do called adding a tracking color. So a lot of the time now with the baits that I'm buying, either from custom builders or even my own baits, I'll add a tracking color. And specifically, that's all that is. It's a very high vis color that you add to the top of the bait. In this case, this is a LaGrady Lures. This is a shortcake. I've got a little bit of chartreuse that I had him add to the top because I want to be able to determine where my bait is. Now, that little bit of chartreuse, you would be blown away at how easy that is to see in the water. I could not be able to see this bluegill pattern bait in any sort of low light conditions, even in good sunny, calm conditions. It's such a natural color that it would blend in with a lot of the surroundings. That little bit of chartreuse on the top makes this bait pop. So now when I'm retrieving this bait back to the boat, I can easily identify where it's at and therefore easily identify whether or not there's a fish following behind it. It's a very, very big thing in the swim bait and glide bait world. But I'll tell you what, I'm applying this now to a lot of different types of baits. Top waters, I do it to jerk baits at times. I do it to shallow running crank baits. It's something that you can apply to a lot of different baits for several different reasons. The first, obviously, is to determine where your bait is at, right? So if you determine where your bait is at, you can see whether or not there's a fish behind it. But even more so, there's a couple other reasons why I really like this. The first is because I can easily identify where my bait is, I can easily work it through cover. So maybe I've got stumps, maybe I've got laydowns, maybe I've got a patch of weeds. I make a long distance cast. I have a hard time determining where my bait is compared to the cover. Well, a little bit of high vis chartreuse, bright orange, bright pink, those are some of the best colors, even white. You can determine where your bait is really well. If you're a frog fisherman, you can apply the same scenario, but you're already doing it if you're using high vis colored frogs. And what I mean by that is if you're using a white frog, you can cast that thing a mile and easily see where it's at when you're bringing it through lily pads or weeds. This is the same concept of that carried over to crankbait. So if I'm trying to work a crankbait through a laydown tree, If I can see that little high vis color coming through the tree, I have a much better chance of bringing it through the laydown because now I know when it's going to hit one of those limbs. Now I know where to stop it. Now I know when it floats up a little bit, I can see it again. It makes me a much more efficient angler and I can work the cover that much better. So that's the primary reason why I actually do it with a lot of other baits outside of the glide bait world. Another reason is because I truly feel like in a lot of circumstances, that little bit of color becomes uh, a reaction type scenario where the fish just see that and they snap and they actually turn out to bite your bait a little bit better. You know, depending on what bait you're throwing, it could be a topwater bait. They may not see much color, but when you're working the topwater bait, if it rolls a little bit, maybe they catch a glimpse of that chartreuse or bright orange or bright pink, and that triggers them to strike your bait. It's something that I do feel like under some conditions, a little bit of high vis brightness to your bait triggers the fish into biting a little bit better. So that's a good thing. Another reason I really like doing it is because it allows me to determine the depth of my bait better. Meaning, if I'm working a shallow running crankbait in clear water, say it runs 3 feet down, I can determine where my bait is because I can actually see it coming back to the boat. The same thing with the glide baits. If I feel like I got to get my bait down 3 or 4 feet to about where the fish are, you know, whether I'm seeing them on the graph or whether I'm just getting more action at the 4 foot depth mark, it's easier for me to determine that the fish are at that depth and that my bait is at the right depth. It's amazing to me how we haven't really seen this take hold in a lot of other baits at this point. Like I said, in the custom glide bait and swim bait world, we're starting to see it quite a bit. But I actually think in the future we're probably going to see a lot of custom lure makers, or not, but mass produced lure makers make standard colors in these baits. So whether it's a topwater or shallow running bait, I think you might start seeing it more because it's becoming very popular and it's for the reasons that I just mentioned. It's not just about, you know, being able to see your bait easily. It's about allowing you to work your bait more efficiently in the areas that you're fishing. So I think that's something that you might want to pay attention to. It's easy to do. You can add nail polish, you can add paint, you can just add you can go out and buy some Spike It dye markers. It's a simple process to do, and it's something that I think you might find to be really not just engaging from a fishing standpoint because you become much more in tune with your bait, but it makes it more entertaining to fish a lot of these baits too because you can see exactly how your bait is responding to your rod twitches, to your reel handle turns. It makes you a better angler. So even if you don't think it helps you catch more fish, which I think is crazy, I actually think it makes you a better angler just to try it because you can see how your bait reacts to what it is that you're doing with it. So give it a try, guys. Add some tracking colors to the top of your bait so that you can easily identify where it's at in the water column. I assure you this is a tip that will make you a better angler. So give it a try, guys. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay tuned. We'll have a new one coming out tomorrow.